debate. There will be a moment or aspect of interdisciplinarity involved here, but this has more to do with how science is related to the rest of society and policy making and things of that sort. And we have a couple of very sort of prominent representative people here talking on their own behalf. Teppo Eskelinen, Director of the Left Forum Finland, and Kristina Pentti von Waltzel, Director of Libera Foundation. We sort of bracket their political, ideological affiliations. We are only interested in the way that their think tanks make use of scientific research and things of that kind. Regarding think tanks themselves, it's another phrase for this might be policy institute. The thing itself is much older than the term. The term emerged sometime in the 1950s, but we have Brookings Institute and others already originating, actually some of them in the 19th century. I discovered some definitions on the internet for this. I'm not sure if the speakers will provide their own definitions, but here is one broad definition. Any organization that produces or uses research to inspire, inform, or influence, and I actually added or legitimize policy. While a narrow definition would put it in these terms, any organization not governed by the rules of academia, policy, the media, or the private sector, and that seeks policy influence through research, informed, argument, etc. I mean, obviously these are not very satisfactory definitions, but they do provide some openings for more rigorous and more articulate definitions. Okay. Now there are different kinds of think tanks, and possibly these two are of similar or different kinds. We might learn more about that, I'm not sure. And these typologies can be organized along different dimensions, such as the sources of funding, from private to public, and this has, of course, major consequences, or at least constraints on the rest, such as the ideological, political affiliation or autonomy from, or with respect to these political, ideological matters. There might be none, so that is no affiliation whatsoever, so a lot of autonomy, or it may be sort of broadly based, encompassing a lot of different kinds of political, ideological orientation, or fairly narrowly circumscribed in this respect. The thematic focus might be from very general, broad range of issues in the policy realm, or very specific issues, and regarding the functional focus, it might be a matter of focusing on producing new research, or consultancy, or responding to invitations to provide information, etc., or advocacy, sort of policy advocacy, campaigning, lobbying, and things of that kind for certain policy directions or solutions. The functional role and sources of disagreement, agreement or disagreement from legitimation of policies to exploration, sort of innovative exploration of new kinds of policies, from intrinsic uniformity within these think tanks to intrinsic debate, allowing for disagreements and in debate, etc. Then regarding the consumers or audiences of the output of this, of the functioning of these think tanks, from general public being addressed and maybe enlightened, educated, or whatever, persuaded to adopt certain viewpoints, through the media, typically, and then at the other end to only like-minded, small fraction of policymakers, or it might be a more broader set of policymakers, some of which would be initially in disagreement, but then will be persuaded to adopt certain positions. Now, locating think tanks in sort of intellectual and organizational structure of the society, insofar as these epistemic activities and institutions are regarded, we have academic science done at universities at one level, as it were, then scientific research done at research institutes that are not located within, or organizationally located within universities. And then we have think tanks, and they do things. I mean, and we have the variable XPI, whatever they do. So we ask, what is it that they do, and we will be informed about that in a moment. And then the question is, how does this X relate to 1 and 2, and then to 4, policy, design, and done by further agents, etc. Now, all of this relates to this concept, not to transdisciplinarity or extra or non-academic transdisciplinarity, and something that we might want to discuss is whether the think tanks provide a new phase, or their own trajectory or history has entered a new phase regarding their strategic role and functional profile as science in general, also science done at universities, is taking sort of more intimate contact with the extra academic partners and issues. So it's characteristic of these kinds of research that they address practical problems and they engage multiple academic and non-academic participants. So, all right. And now, among the issues that arise, there might be a tension here between the authority of objective science, on the one hand. Science is very powerful just because it has this aura of being objective, neutral, uncompromised, and all that. But when there is a demand for practical relevance regarding problems that are politically contested, then this tension may arise, and this is, I think, fairly obvious in the case of think tanks. And I suppose you're sort of struggling with this tension on a daily basis, but you know more about how you go about with it. Here is another observation. Extra academic transdisciplinary research is often project-based. So just particular projects, one after the other, etc., and not therefore institutionalized, while think tanks are relatively stable organizations. And the question here is whether this has interesting, important consequences. Here is what I found in the Wikipedia, and this deals with exactly this issue. The Policy Institute is often a tank in the intellectual sense. Discussion only in a sheltered group protected from outside influence isolates the participants, subjects them to several concrete biases like groupthink, confirmation bias, etc., and fosters members' existing beliefs. And then the question is whether this is very different or similar to sort of disciplinary communities in science. There are similar biases probably within scientific disciplines exercised in the academic sphere. Okay, then we have this list of questions. I'll briefly repeat it. This has been actually mutually agreed with the three of us, and this was also provided in the ad for this session on various lists. The first question: why are there think tanks in the first place? Why are they needed? What exactly are the objectives and ambitions of your particular think tank? What are the most important scientific disciplines, theories, and lines of scientific inquiry for your think tank? Why are they important, and what roles do they play in your activity? How do they play those roles? How does science compare to other sources of opinion, such as political ideologies, in the shaping of policy conclusions? How do you draw the line between science and non-science, and between good and less good science? You should not rely on garbage science, I suppose, because you would lose your own credibility as a policy-relevant agent, epistemic agent. To what extent can political disagreements be reduced by appealing to scientific research? This is, of course, part of the sort of the official doctrine, also in the science minimal or non-existent? Okay. So, and you have been asked to provide some answers to these questions, and here we go. The floor is all yours.
Okay. To start with, I'm not going to answer Uskalin's question as a list of questions, but rather reflect around the themes. Some of what I'm going to present here will be somewhat overlapping with what has already been said in the introduction, but I hope you don't mind too much. Most of what was said, I of course agreed with, only that I find that in order to provoke discussion, Uskalin wanted to make a very sharp distinction between the ideas of social science and think tanks, and somehow to me it seems that the practice of doing social science and working for a think tank is not that different on a day-to-day basis. I shifted from being a social scientist, a lecturer in social and public policy, to being a think tank director, and it's only just appeared to me that this is the first time I've really had to think through what it means to work for a think tank from a social scientific point of view, and the first time I've had to defend myself as a director of a think tank and therefore a potential propagandist. And it was actually somehow surprising to find myself thinking through that I've never really had to seriously face these questions, mostly because personally I felt the transition from academia to think tank was such a smooth process. I find myself doing lots of very similar things that what I used to do when working at the university. Nevertheless, a few reflections, and I try to focus on the difference between think tanks and academia, and what I guess you're sort of provoking as the main question, which is the criteria of demarcation between social science and think tank work. To start with, of course, we note that there's a very visible emergence of think tanks. Of course, the phenomenon itself, or the institution itself, are old, as was already mentioned in the introduction, but clearly there are lots more think tanks than there used to be in numerical terms, and they tend to be also more influential as they used to be. This applies both globally and especially within Finland. Here, I guess, political think tanks are something of a relatively new phenomenon. So we somehow have to look at the soil on which think tanks emerge. What is the sort of social condition which gives rise to these kinds of institutions, give some kind of social demand for them. First, it seems to me that there's an ever less clear demarcation between academia, independent research units, NGOs, lobby organizations, and so on. So if we want to defend academic ideals, academic values of social science, we have to know that there's a constant push also within academia to be more policy relevant and to engage in dialogues with civil society, engage in dialogues with politicians, publish more and communicate more in also popular arenas, always have a blog, and so on, so on, so on. So clearly, what I find is also a process in which academia moves in its ideas and practices towards the practices of NGOs or think tanks, and not only a process in which think tanks emerge. Also, a lot of NGOs and lobby organizations have something of a research arm, do some kind of knowledge production, independent surveys, knowledge production, and so on and so on. And this further makes the demarcation between academia and other social organizations more. It makes the demarcation ever less clear. And somehow we note the change in politics itself. Perhaps some decades ago, the sort of big ideologies which were guiding political practices were a lot more clear to anyone involved in politics or any citizens in general. It was quite clear that there's a difference between left-wing, right-wing ideologies. A lot of social utopias which were inspiring people might have been a bit off the ground, but at least they were clear and inspiring and presenting a clear alternative to the existing order. And the kind of politics which seems to have emerged during the past 2-3 decades can be classified more as mere governance than politics reacting to some overarching large social utopia or a big ideology. And therefore there seems to be also a general pressure to produce a kind of utopian thinking or more scientific ideas to motivate politics and show that there's a difference between different political ideas and so on. And this is part of the soil on which think tanks emerge as a phenomenon. In Finland, the very practical reason between the emergence of think tanks like the one I work for was a policy program designed by a past government which aimed at involving citizens more in politics. Now it's very unclear to me why the policy program for political involvement of citizens led to funding for think tanks. This is totally unclear to me, but somehow this was the excuse for setting up such institutions in Finland as a very practical political reason behind it. Now, of course, there are also independent, private-funded think tanks. That's a bit of a different story. But also, they seem to have emerged in the wake of these sort of official political think tanks. Further, I'm not that convinced that there's such a thing as a think tank identity. That we can take think tanks as a sort of uniform group with a clearly exclusive identity and start analyzing what think tanks are, what they do, and so on. Clearly some institutions which call themselves think tanks are closer to academic research. They can be very, very close to academic research in their everyday practices. Some are clearly closer to NGOs, even charities, producing information for the need of individual political campaigns and so on. And some, inevitably, are very close to lobbies, right? Producing information for the benefits of some industry or some group and so on. And if you look at what kind of institutions globally are called think tanks, quite a lot of them, and most of the most influential ones, are such that think tank can be seen as a euphemism for a lobby organization. You have to bear this in mind also. So what we can ask is that is there a need to find a think tank identity, or rather to acknowledge the pluralism of producers of social scientific knowledge and all the related problems of reliability. I would argue that the group of institutions called think tanks is such heterogeneous that you don't necessarily have to think of a scientific or social scientific problem of the reliability of information produced by think tanks, but rather should be looking at an ever more heterogeneous field of producers of social scientific knowledge, bear in mind that also academic social science can have very different starting points and ideas and relations to high scientific standards. Now, a few points on the demarcation between think tanks and social science nevertheless. Now, I tried to say something about this demarcation, but I hope you bear in mind that this would be my main approach, which I have just presented. That's this kind of uniform think tank identity doesn't seem to my mind, in my mind, to exist. Now, first, of course, a lot of think tanks can exist only for propaganda reasons, and we have to bear this in mind. For example, the clearest example of such, to me, would seem to be the very large financial means enjoyed by, for example, different climate change denialist groups. They inevitably get a lot, considerable funds from, for example, oil industries and so on, and all of them call themselves, of course, think tanks. Now, also, there seems to be, having said this, there seems to be a genuine difficulty to demarcate between such propaganda and social scientific schools of thought. For example, if you look at Marxism and liberalism as social scientific disciplines, it would be difficult to say that one is about propaganda and one is about social scientific research, but very clearly they are associated with different ends of the political spectrum. Yet both schools of thought are very consistent in their own terms, very logistically consistent. It's not that they have necessarily different presets or prefixed conclusions, but rather different entry points to the study of social reality. And any research from these entry points can, as said, be carried out very coherently and consistently. Also clearly, think tanks don't usually have any criterion for pre-review for assessing methodological choices. And this is usually what would be most likely the most typical difference between think tank practice and social scientific research. We hope, in social science, we expect any piece of research to pass some kind of test of anonymous peer review. Rather, what think tanks do have is something of an open choice whether or not to use such. A lot of think tanks actually have processes recently, open peer review, or a blind double oneself to following such scientific processes. And very often there seems to be attempts to create something resembling peer review. For example, a lot of think tanks have scientific committees. Individual research projects can have something of scientific leading group, a steering group. Think tanks seem to develop, most typically, most often, scientific criteria which are not yet identical to those followed in social science. Still, you have to keep in mind that the choice between social scientific schools of thought is also always political to some extent. Because there is no value-free social science and little reason to draw a sharp distinction between facts and value in social science, we cannot use the notion of facts as a demarcation criteria between social science and something else think tanks represent, but rather we have to somehow appeal to scientific processes or scientific process criteria, such as peer review or something resembling that, or more sort of generally appeal to something which we call scientific values. Now, my suggestion is the best I can come up with. What could be the sort of conceptual tool for analyzing when social scientific knowledge produced by a think tank is reliable and when it's not, would be to use some kind of concept of scientific values or scientific integrity. And of course, this cannot be assessed from the outside. It's all a think tank can do is to try to follow such scientific values or integrity in its research or an openness to counter-arguments, and slowly hope to convince its audience that it's really committed to following such values, and it's really committed to such kind of integrity in its approach to research. And further, of course, scientific research doesn't resolve political disputes. This was one of the questions I was asked to reflect here. But it can show what kind of claims are wrong, or clearly wrong, or suspect. And I think tanks can do pretty much the same, but pick their topics of analysis perhaps more flexibly than social science. Somehow they can work towards the same goal as social science in the respect of showing what is clearly false or what kind of claims don't seem to have any empirical grounding. I'm just about to finish. Now, of course, the topic of this session is the difference between social science and think tanks. But to me, it seems that a lot of sort of practical day-to-day reflection I need to do in my work is not actually reflecting the difference between knowledge production within a think tank and social science, but the difference between knowledge production within think tank and actual day-to-day politics or past politics. And what think tanks do differently from politics is to somehow try to produce a longer term or somehow deeper or more sophisticated vision of social science, of society, the future of society, try to engage social scientific concepts in politics and try to push some kind of systematic analysis to the field of politics. Because politics often has problems communicating any sort of long-term vision beyond day-to-day political governance. And my last slide, practically what we do in the think tank. Is, I think, is clarifying if you try to reflect think tanks in comparison to everyday practice of social science. First, creating some kind of social visions. Try to do conceptual innovation. Try to look at existing social phenomena and try to push one's own concepts to describing such phenomena, and try to also formulate some kind of utopian futures from one's own value perspective. None of this has to relate directly to everyday politics. Second, do analysis based on somewhat lighter or somewhat less restrictive methodology than typical social science. For example, we've published a number of reports based on expert interviews. Now, you couldn't do that in systematic social science, I guess, or it would be a bit suspect, sort of borderline social scientific methodology. For a think tank, it's very kind of a natural thing to do. Pick, say, 10 or 15 prominent experts of a field and do something of a half-structured interview of those experts and then try to gather or somehow put together something of a synthesis of what they have to say. Now, of course, that's very value-laden for the very reason that you pick the experts, right? There's no systematic criteria for picking such experts you could really defend. But nevertheless, that's producing somewhat interesting and relevant information. Third, can pick underexplored topics with some social relevance and engage with them quite quickly. Now, as an example, I'm starting myself to carry out after Christmas a small report on the social relevance of time banking. Now, I'm sure that there'll be a lot of PhDs on time banks and community exchange in Finland and so on, but that will take time, right? It'll take time to sort of initiate that kind of research. It'll take time to apply funds for that kind of research, and it will take a few years to actually conduct that properly. Think tanks can react to that kind of underexplored topics, do something within a time frame of 2-3 months, which doesn't necessarily pass all social scientific criteria, but it's there quite quickly when the topic seems to be generally relevant in political discussion. And I could add number 4, which is providing a platform for like-minded researchers. Now, practically, a lot of think tanks seem to be, for example, publishing journals. Maybe peer-reviewed, maybe not, but anyway, something of a social scientific journal. And the work of think tank doesn't necessarily need to be anything else natural selection of who's interested in publishing in a given think tank's journal, but nevertheless, a lot of work done within think tanks can be just about providing such a platform which of course doesn't raise similar kinds of demarcation problems as knowledge production itself does. Now, I seem to have used more than my time, so I stop now. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience. Thank you, Uskal, for a very interesting introduction. It's good to hear something about the field you work with yourself, because you tend to get quite blind after a while. Also, thank you, Teppo, for a very interesting presentation. My name is Kristina Pentti. I represent Libera. I will say a few very short words about us in a while, as I suspect that some of you, or most of you, don't know who we are. And I'm the director of this think tank. So, founded in 2011, we are politically unaffiliated and independent think tank here in Helsinki. We promote individual liberty, free enterprise, free markets, and a free society. Now, politically unaffiliated means that none of the Finnish political parties are overly fond of us. And independent means we have a wide private funding base with some 20 plus individual donors over the last 2.5 years. We do not accept public funding. This was an interesting distinction which Uskal already made, and we do not do consultancy work. We do not say that we are politically neutral. I think none of us are, but we do not endorse any particular political party. This is a very important point for us. And in terms of freedom, we are very keen on promoting the for us vital combination of liberty and responsibility, and generally want to contribute to a society where these two meet. We publish an assortment of stuff, mainly on the web. We do reports, we do analysis, we do research, although not the peer review type. We organize events, mostly debates, but most of all, we want to be an arena for thought and for action for all citizens, not just decision makers, and enable an open discussion on the topics and concepts of freedom and responsibility. And finally, as I sense a certain juxtaposition, considering I have my colleague from Vasemmista Forum here, yes, we are to the right when it comes to economic questions, but we are also 100% value liberal, which I guess in the Finnish political field makes us a lot more left than, for example, kokoomusmaat. So, are think tanks a fad, or are they actually needed? According to the University of Michigan, who is, I think, the most reliable institution that catalogs and indexes think tanks in the world and researches them, there are 6,500 think tanks in the world. Roughly 2,000 of them are operating in the States, and almost 30 here in Finland, and this number is growing increasingly every year. And I think in that sense, it can be said that it is more a phenomenon, a social phenomenon, I think, than just a fad. But why do we exist, and are we in fact needed? Well, insofar as we are talking about politically unaffiliated actors, which is what I represent, from our point of view, think tanks remind citizens that they need to think for themselves and be critical of what kind of information they process, how they process it, also after they finish their education. Sometimes this is forgotten in our society today. We do not tell people what to think. All we do is ask that people do think and use their heads from time to time. Now, we do not claim to be a scientific actor. I think in Uskal's intro it said that think tanks seek to appear both scientific and politically relevant, but for us at Libera, we do have great respect for the academic world and the science which is produced in the academic world, in the scientific institutions, but we do not seek to portray ourselves as scientific. We could by no means do that. We don't have any on our staff who have done a PhD, for example. We do have multiple degrees, but none of us has a doctorate. So rather we talk about fact-based information and the dissemination of that information. And for me personally, science and academia, though very important in themselves, become really important only when they have the power to actually affect the lives of people. Now, I was supposed to become an archaeologist and focus on the Assyrian and Sumerian cultures, but at some point I realized I wouldn't be able to actually make the world a better place for anybody while doing so. So I just read the books now and try to do other stuff from 9 to 5. At any rate, in our work, I think in terms of disciplines, theories, lines of scientific inquiry, we rely mostly on economics, we rely on statistics, but also on social psychology and to some extent on sociology. And in a theoretical sense, we are keen followers of classical liberalism, which arguably is more a philosophy than any certain theory. In terms of analysis, we do quantitative and qualitative approaches and are maybe a bit more fond of the quantitative type due to the fact that Elina Lepomäki, who is our research director and who could not be here today, has a background in mathematics, in engineering, in economics, and in finance. As you probably see by now, I am following Uskali's questions more stringently than my colleague. I was also asked to talk about why are these disciplines, these theories, these scientific inquiries, why are they important for a think tank such as Libera, which arguably does not do scientific research? Well, I mean, the truth sets you free, right? So even for us being horrible right-wing people, at the end of the day, 1 + 1 will always be 2, and this is important. We approach everything we do based on hard facts, and without the stringent use of science, of theory, of methodology, our facts are not verifiable and really can't be communicated to the wider public. We are not politically neutral, like I said. I don't believe anybody else is, but in the information we are trying to put out, we at least strive to be as objective as we can. At the beginning of the year, we met with another Finnish think tank, the representatives of which are not here today, who clearly had made up their minds in advance what kind of people we are, and asked us what we do. Should we find something that doesn't support, for example, free markets? Do we publish it? Well, of course we do. We publish what we find, not what we hope to find. I think this is a very basic sort of important thing to keep in mind. In terms of how science differs from political ideology, I think 4 points of views, which also reflect the questioning that Uskali has brought forth. How does science compare to other sources of opinion, such as political ideology, in the shaping of policy conclusions? Well, I think one important fact is that science does not strive to be re-elected, and this is something I think you see a lot when you look at the political discourse. Science has no other agenda than presenting the results it has found, presenting facts and presenting the truth. Also, the line between science and non-science, between good science and less good science, well, I mean, good science can always be verified. It should be have a replicable element to it. It's truthful, whereas bad science is not, in the sense that good science is not used for distortion. It's not used for bringing forth results which are not there. It doesn't speculate. It just tells the truth the way you found it. Also, to what extent can political disagreements be reduced by appealing to scientific research? Well, in theory, as science is based on fact, it should be able to override any argument. But unfortunately, especially in political dialogue and in political debate, this is, I think, rarely the case. Affect almost always overrides cognition. Even if we're told that 1 + 1 is 2, if we have an emotional, strong basis for believing it's not that way, emotion usually rules over cognition and over fact. And this also, of course, is tied to the last question of, in regard to what sorts of policy issues is the contribution of science minimal or think, somewhat telltale of the industrialized countries we have here in Europe. We have the luxury of being able to react with feeling to some sort of, or to political arguments, whereas people in other countries need to fight for staying alive or being able to vote, being able to trust the authorities, being able to have clean water. So I think this is true especially of the debate we see in Europe. Emotions will always overrule cognitive arguments, and they also rule most political issues. So the challenge, I think, for think tanks, and in a sense maybe also the scientific community, is how do we get people to actually understand and absorb facts, despite emotions, despite having a very strong affective basis for believing that something is right or wrong, even though you have a verified content in front of you. And this is not exclusive to think tanks, like I said. I think this is something the scientific world maybe should consider as well. And if I should need to summarize our point of view to this whole discussion, which we've been invited here today to hear, I think it's important to say that think tanks and science are not rivals. We are not the jealous little brother of the scientific world or the academic world. Rather, we see ourselves as a vessel for disseminating the very important work and information and knowledge which is done in the scientific world. I was shorter than that. Thank you.
Would you like to sort of reflect on each other's opening statements?
Well, I have one thing I think that, well, people said a lot of very smart stuff, but one thing I think is a big issue is the peer reviewable aspect of the work which is done in think tanks. And even though I don't think we strive to put out publications which will appear in certain journals, it would be good, just in terms of having an open debate, that a wider maybe community would be able to assess the stuff we do. For example, we are publishing a new report on Wednesday this week, and about 50 people have read it in advance. And we've tried to have a very sort of wide scale from all the different political parties, but from all walks of social sort of life. We have unemployed young people, we have students, and so on. But still, I feel it's not. I would never say that this is sort of a verifiable truth, because 50 people are only 50 people. But it would be very good to have some kind of sort of more systematized approach to this.
Yes, I don't think anyone opposes the idea of having as wide audience as possible reading some publications in advance. Of course, it's always also a matter of time and resources you have at your disposal. Sometimes I do also feel that it would be a good idea to have kind of a very wide sort of also non-scientific board looking at some kind of publication. Now, often what's being done in think tank I represent is to have some kind of scientific committee who are actually social scientists commenting on some work when it's in progress, not actually looking at finished manuscript, but rather trying to follow that when it's being written. Now, I do think that it contributes more to the actual scientific value of the publication. Of course, the downside is that it kind of engages those social scientists in the writing process, so that it can make it more difficult for them to look at the text as outsiders. So there are, I guess, two sides of the coin here. To sort of pick up on something which you just represented. First, the point of potential replicability is a good point. I hope I said it myself. If you look at different kinds of criteria of legitimate social science. And of course, one basic criteria is that theoretically it's always possible to replicate the research. Now, practically, I doubt it's not always possible. If you're looking at a sort of political phenomenon or social scientific phenomenon, it can be a passing phenomenon. It can be very time-bound in the sense that practically it's impossible to replicate it. But of course, when designing research methodology, that should also be something of a guiding criteria. Generally, I'm not sure I believe in the concept of facts in social science as much as you do, at least in your presentation. A lot of social scientists or philosophers of social science tend to be quite critical of the idea of social scientific fact for a good reason. The reason that social scientific research is always somehow value-laden and reflects the theoretical perspective. It's already grounded on some choices which might inevitably be normative in nature, like, say, economics. Now, economics tends to produce lots of facts, but even in economics, I think we should be asking which economics we're talking about. Right? If you think of, say, monetarist economics or Keynesian economics, they are very, very consistent on their own concepts. They just tend to start from different basic worldview or some methodological assumptions related to, for example, what is money? How does the existence of money relate to the existence of political community, and so on and so on. And you tend to have to make these choices before even starting to produce the facts. Right? So I do think that we have to uphold some scientific values or be honest on the starting points of what we do. But I would be a bit more doubtful of that category of facts. Facts, as they appear, might often only reflect hegemonic ideas or sort of logical or be only reflections of what is logical given some hegemonic starting points, and not necessarily be reflections of external social reality as such. But I don't think I have more sort of immediately in my mind.
Well, I mean, of course, you're right in the sense that, and this applies to all scientific research. As a researcher, you must make your sort of your own value grounds known to the reader, so the reader knows where you're coming from. Because, of course, you choose your own measures, or even often, for example, in social psychology, which is my field, where I'm constantly in social psychology, you construct your measures. You choose which items you have, and these, of course, might reflect your value choices. So I do agree with you, but I think insofar as you make your position known, it's not wrong to talk about facts, especially when we talk about math. And of course, statistics can also be misconstrued, they can be misused, but that's not very scientific, is it? And this is where replicability comes in hand. I mean, for any think tank, be they independent or with a political agenda, say that you would withhold your data from somebody who says, I want to look at what you've done, can I please have your data? You say no. I mean, that's, I think, the first sort of rule breaker. You can never do that. And this is, of course, an intrinsic part of what we do as think tanks, both you and vigorous, that we want to have open debate, we want to have open discussion. Because in Finland, a big challenge is that the focus is not on what is being said, but on who is saying it. So people stop listening. For example, when I tell people that we have Björn Wahlroos on our board, that's when they stop listening to what I say and they just think, no, horrible. And I think this is a very big challenge in the political field here in such a small country.
There's actually a similar phenomenon in the scientific realm. There's this phenomenon of scientific authority. It depends on who says, who speaks, etc.
Or whether it's a professor or a doctor.
For example, or
and not just
professor couple of issues here that have been taken up. One has to do with facts. I mean, the challenge that, as you formulated it for Libera, how do we get people to absorb facts despite emotions? I mean, this actually, I'm a friend of facts, but then we need to distinguish between facts out there that are there regardless of our beliefs and feelings and evaluations of them, etc., and then the facts as we construe them and things like that. And now this, and the latter is very, very, of course, contestable and disputable and uncertain and things like that. But this idea that it would be your mission to get people to absorb fact despite emotions reminds me of the sociology of science idea that people typically in different disciplines or exponents of different theories believe that they are in possession of the facts, and if somebody is in disagreement, they are biased, they are laden with their emotions or ideologies or irrationalities and things of that kind. There is this kind of asymmetry, and therefore I'm a bit dubious about this idea that you would be, or anybody would be, irrefutably in possession of the facts and would only educate others to adopt these facts and thereby to sort of give way to their emotions.
Right, of course, and this is, I'm not saying that we're trying to educate people and that we possess the facts, but in general in Finland there's a problem with a quite one-sided way in the media of presenting things. And I think I read somewhere that Finns are the least media critical people in Europe. And if it's printed in Helsinki Sanomat or if it's on the 10 o'clock news, then it's a fact. And I, for once, I want my kids to be able to read the media and think, okay, this person has written so-and-so, but what are his own values and beliefs? And this is, of course, the way I want people to treat their information we put out. But we just ask what people do think and that they do listen. I'm not saying that we're right, but we're presenting an alternative solution. And I think that's what everybody's doing. I mean, we're not exactly drowned by information in this country. Or we are, but it's presented in a way which doesn't give, I think, much room for the individual to think.
Just to pick up on something which we previously said, I think this is actually a highly important element of the debate here, which just said that it shouldn't be important who's saying, but rather what is being said, right? Now, of course, this is the very, very basic, something belonging to the very basics of what sort of argumentation theory tells us, from the very sort of elementary causes in good argumentation. Don't use ad hominem argumentation, right? Look at what's being said, not who says. But now, shouldn't we really, in a field like think tanks, be a bit more skeptical about the idea that this kind of ad hominem argumentation is necessarily necessarily a bad thing. What I'm referring to is that there are lots of personal vested interests also in different kinds of processes and behind lots of funding, right? There might be sort of people having a reason to promote certain ideologies, not only because of their ideological nature, but it's because of their personal interest. Or companies say, if there's research done on, say, climate change, and you find that there's a large oil company funding it, shouldn't that be a part of the sort of fairness of argument to point out who is funding that there's that kind of vested interest involved? Part of the very sort of ideal of openness in science, to also point out that who is saying, or who's implicitly saying, or who's behind some research might have an effect of what's being produced.
important to distinguish between think tanks and lobby organizations. These are not the two, same things.
Anyway, as a brief follow-up, why exactly don't you accept public funding? What's so bad about public funding?
Well, because we believe that, publicly funded think tanks are funded with tax money. And I, for example, have not chosen that my tax money will go to this and this and this think tank. So we prefer people to give us money out of free will.
But then you would refuse to pay any taxes whatsoever because you've never chosen the
But no, this is not about refusing to pay tax.
destination of that money. But
No, but for example, I pay tax because I think free healthcare and free education are important things in Finland. But I don't necessarily think that, for example, political parties need to have think tanks which are sponsored by tax money, such as some are.
So sure.
I was just thinking, we know that Libero has private funding. You have several people working there.
We have to.
Okay. In any case, you're able to collect some money from the market, so to speak, but leftist thinkers are not. You know this is a fact. Just trying to say that maybe your position is a bit unfair, so to speak, because we know this.
But how do we know that leftist thinkers are not able to collect money from the market?
Is there?
Perhaps we
Well,
try.
I just ask you because I don't know. I don't know if, for example, the leftist forum has attempted. I don't know if other
He's
actors.
paid by the leftist evening article. So do you see what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. I see what you mean. But for example, in order to cater completely to the kind of right-wing market which I assume you're alluding to, we should be totally conservative also in our values. And we have some sponsors which you would assume that would, for example, happily support us, but because we also support gay marriage, the division of church and state, and so on, they don't think that we're doing the right thing. My point is just that I don't think it's very fruitful to make a distinction between leftist and rightist in this case. I mean, that's how the market works. If your idea works, you're able to sell it. And I think you'd be surprised if you know how little a budget we operate.
Okay, let's take comments, questions.
Thank you. I'm also a bit suspect of this idea of putting facts and emotions to opposite sides. Because it seems to imply that there is some source, somebody who's representing facts, and then there are those people who are irrational and emotional. This kind of equation of irrationality and emotion comes up as a kind of implication from what you say. And I mean, emotions seem to be at stake, but at a different level. They seem to be involved in this kind of value commitments that lie behind these different frames of enter, where we come to engage with this social scientific research. As Teppo Eskelinen pointed out, that there is this value-based entrance points that differ people, and therefore, for instance, leftist thinkers take equality as a perhaps more important value as freedom, or they have different interpretation of what freedom means to them. But this emotional commitment lies at the level of values rather than being something where you could evaluate this, emotions versus facts, which seems to come up from your perspective.
Yes, okay, I'm not sure I understand your question, or was it just a comment?
It's more like a comment. Yeah.
Well, I'll give you an example, which is not from the political world. I did my master's thesis here from the university on the attitudes of policemen, or the Finnish police force, towards immigrants. example, contacted immigrants and had more positive attitudes, the strongest mediator in between in a regression analysis was always whether they felt empathy or whether they felt positive feelings towards the immigrants. Whereas if they knew that immigrants were good people, for example, i.e. the cognitive side, it didn't have any effect at all in this. So emotions, this is just an example. You see what I'm getting at? That if you're trying to, for example, reduce prejudice towards immigrants among a working group who always meets a lot of clients under not so optimal situations, for example, you meet people who hit their wives and hit their children, and you tend, of course, to meet a lot of immigrants too in that work. But if you always meet them under negatively loaded circumstances, if you don't have the emotional, sort of positive emotion in play, you can never have more positive attitudes towards them. And it's just, and this is something which has been found all over the world when you've done social psychological studies of how people react to not just immigrants, but any other minority group or groups which are not their own, is that the emotional component is very important. And this is, of course, not the same as political ideology, but it still says something about how we tend to process information.
Yeah, I agree with you that emotions do have that influence on how we process information and cognition in general. But still it seems to be that this conflict between emotion is not at the level of first order facts, but it's more at the order of value commitments.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay, so the first speaker mentioned that mentioned the use of expert interviews as part of the methodology of think tanks, and I'm very interested in this because, well, one comment is that I don't think that that's not a scientific methodology because engineers actually use that all the time, or the Federal Reserve uses that all the time. But my question is, what kind of criteria, if any explicit criteria, are involved in selecting experts? And I'm interested because that goes back to the problem of values and objectivity and all those things. So you can very easily select the people that you know will likely give certain kind of answers rather than others, and so skewing, so to speak, your opinion in this available spectrum, so to speak. So I'm wondering what kind of criteria you would suggest for that.
Now, I'll be very honest with you. This is a country of 5 million people. You take any very specific question and you try to find 10 experts, you have them all, right? That happens most of the time, right? For example, in September, we published a report on children's daycare and how the proposed cut of the subjective right to daycare would affect the government economically and what kind of social consequences that would have. And the authors of the report, they interviewed 10 experts. Now that's included pretty much everyone in the field of social science at the university who had actually seriously studied the subject. The main sort of responsible civil servants in the three largest towns in Finland, and some civil servants at the ministry responsible for children's daycare. And so practically, in a country of this size, it's very easy to select experts by taking them all. Right? So that's kind of selection criteria. It's very, very obvious.
Research done in places like business schools is very heavily dependent on consulting experts. It's very, very sort of legitimate, justified method. So it's not at all excluded in the scientific realm. I think there is a parallel here, or analogy perhaps, between this question and then the idea that I got from Christina. Emily, you said your mission is to disseminate fact-based information. There's no pretension to be scientific, so you only disseminate information that consists of facts or is fact-based. But then, of course, the further question is, how do you establish yourself that you have access to the reliable facts? There needs to be a lot of epistemic trust between you and your informant, maybe in the scientific sphere, etc. And then, I mean, of course, yes, but how do you, just like selecting the experts, the reliable experts, how do you select your scientific informants as reliable sources of credible facts?
Well, in the case of Libero, we have quite large experts and advisors network, which consists of professors from Finland, but also of researchers from abroad, and the different research staff of a number of international think tanks. And a lot of what we do is done on a voluntary basis. For example, the report we're publishing now on Wednesday has been co-written with Professor Pauli of Rankolasland for free because he thought it was a good idea. And of course, we try to approach very sort of a wide academic base. Like I said, I absolutely salute and welcome the idea of having a more peer-reviewable sort of platform for this. But for me, if a person is a professor here, I think it's I hold that in high esteem. But I also hold an independent researcher in high esteem if I can see what that person has done, and if those, for example, the articles he has published have been peer-reviewed and appeared in journals, because then you know that maybe 50 or 100 people have looked at the text and found it to be good enough to be published.
Insofar as the sort of political preferences of these prominent professors is concerned, I wonder if they are sort of statistically nicely distributed, or whether there's any bias here.
Well, I haven't asked them all what they feel, but you may rest assured that, for example, Heikki Hilamo, who has contributed to the report which we are giving out on Wednesday, probably does not share my views on market economy, but he does think that the model represented is a good one. So we do have a wide spectrum. We also have Osmo Sointila, who of course is not an academic, but it represents an entirely other spectrum of thinking.
Okay, then we have
I think there is an interesting clarification to be made from a distinction, and that actually comes from statistics. If you want to clarify the difference between think tanks and academia, and that is that of hypothesis and data. So where do hypotheses come from is one question, and I think that think tanks deal with this question in a very different way from academia, which is that you often take hypotheses as given, and you do not postulate explicitly where the hypothesis comes from. And when in academia you have to have a theoretical basis, etc., you often have these hidden premises that are necessary for your conclusions to follow that you don't actually explicitly postulate. But then when it comes to what kind of data is actually support for what kind of a hypothesis, and how much should we update our degree of belief to the hypothesis in accord with our data, that is the question of empirical adequacy, which is a cognitive or scientific value that is actually almost the only one that philosophers of science nowadays would agree with to be a demarcation criteria. And that is an interesting thing. I think Christina made a mistake by using the term verifiability, which is an ancient thing, and which after that was replaced by falsificationism and then by testability, coming to a smaller and smaller thing.
It's been a while since I did my methodology.
But anyhow, when in academia, where the hypotheses come from, the criteria are more stringent for academics than for think tankers. I would say that empirical adequacy, that is the role between the data and your hypothesis, has to be more stringent for think tankers than for academia. And why? It's because in order for any of your suggestions to work in real policy, you have to have causal models that actually very stringently link your hypothesis to the data that you've taken. When in academia we're always lucky just to postulate something and never actually having to fulfill these postulates in reality and see if it works in pragmatics. So what I'm saying is that in think tanks you have to have very, very stringent conditions of empirical adequacy, i.e. causal models for your work to make any sense, but where the hypothesis comes from, you do not have to be that explicit about, which you actually have to be within academia.
Well, I guess, you pretty much summed up why I chose the think tank world and not the academic world, because I'm actually interested in being acquainted with the real world.
I would be defending the sort of general publications we've been doing that hypotheses are not that sort of given. They can be also, they can come from different sources with different motivations. They can be pass sort of usual social scientific tests and so on and so on. What I'd like to remind you about is that practically working for a think tank, the sort of scientific demarcation problem is not that often about scientific methodology itself, but rather a matter of publication criteria. What think tanks really do, what I do day to day is that I don't really do social scientific research. I sort of look through what kind of research to initiate, and when I can be sort of confident that some manuscripts or an article is fit to be published, and sort of I can personally stand behind the publication, right? So, and of course, it's relevant to talk about scientific methodology here, but I would urge you, if you really want to think about reality for working in a think tank and reality of how does a think tank establish its credibility, to think more to think yourself more as a journal editor than a social scientist committing research.
I think to me that sounds a bit too cynical, because if you want to make an impact that is data-based, you should have models that you rely on, and i.e. they should be basically as good as causal models come. And if you don't have these, then actually you shouldn't be, or if you're not trying even to get there, then you shouldn't be advising policy at all. You're just doing politics by disseminating information to the people, but the information might not be worth anything.
Sure, of course. I'm just trying to point out that what kind of problems of reliability emerge in sort of day-to-day work you do within a think tank. Just as a reminder.
Is the follow-up on this?
Say that again.
You were talking in the previous slide about Marxism and Leninism and liberalism and stuff like that. And I understand that we can never, separate ourselves from these values what we have about politics or general about life. And when this slide came, you started talking about the epistemic norms of science, like previewing and stuff like that. And I think these norms are quite separated, or quite different from each other, or have I misunderstood? Are you talking about
I'm not sure I was talking about personal values of social scientists. If I get the impression, I'm sorry, I was talking about how social scientific paradigms always carry some value judgment
Yes.
within their methodology and their general workflow and so on. But sort of the ethics or values of individual researcher, I don't think I was talking about
Yeah,
that.
I was exactly asking this because I wasn't sure about what came in. But does it mean then, for instance, that Keynesian and a liberal economist have completely different or fundamentally different, values about how research should be done, basically? Because that was one of your examples. You were talking about Keynesian economics. I'm sorry, Martin, you don't have.
No, I'm not saying that they have different ideas on how research should be done, different ideas of scientific values. I say they have some very fundamental differences of ideas of what economics essentially is about.
Yes.
Is economics essentially a science on how goods and services are traded, or is the science about monetary systems, say, or what a Marxist economist would say, it's science about production, the conditions of production.
Okay.
So I'm saying that you can take different viewpoints on similar phenomenon, which tend to be somehow seen as political as such. Because it's very obvious that Marxism and liberalism take different political standpoints.
I agree with that. Thank you.
We have at least four people wishing to speak, and therefore I would like to ask you to be brief. Martina is next.
Okay. I found very interesting the fact that the two of you are here. We heard like two different models of work and how think tanks are situated between the worlds of science and politics. I'm very interested in how the two of you did that. So to overemphasize maybe a little bit, we had one case where a think tank is basically has as a function the diffusion of scientific knowledge, and then sort of spreads it also to the world of politics, but did not seem to be very closely associated with politics itself. And we had another model, your model, which was much more of saying, well, any kind of science is always also political, at least social sciences. And in that sense, what we're doing at the think tank is as much scientific as it is also political. And I think these are really quite separate kind of positionings. And I would wonder now in what respect you think this also shows in your activities itself. For example, how does it show in your case, in your publications or in your communication with different realms, the sense that what you're doing is always also political? In what sense, in your case, do you think you present your work as one which is sort of valid even outside any kind of political situation?
I think that social science is in some sense also political. I mean, in the sense that it's always value-laden somehow. I think it's only being honest about what social science is about. It cannot be sort of a value-neutral enterprise, even though a lot of people would like to see it that way. I mean, that's only about honesty. What I was saying about think tanks and science was not that think tanks are as scientific as social science. I said that they're potentially as scientific. They can be that. There's no clear or given or evident institutional demarcation criteria between social science and think tanks. And to me, that's reflected only in the urge to sort of represent or sort of convince the audience of our scientific quality. It's a matter of having to convince such an audience and potential audience of us following those scientific values, because it's that can be achieved, but it's not necessarily the case, and no one should take it as given that a think tank follows such sort of scientific values. Right?
Yeah, if I just answer briefly, I will stress that we are by no means not political, but we are not party political, and I think this is sort of the big distinction. I can't as an individual say that I'm not political because I believe certain things and I vote and so on, but as an organization, we don't have a party boss required to further the agenda of a certain political party or even a certain institution. I know a lot of you probably think that our financiers decide what we write, but it really is the other way around, working on the principle of the free market. We have ideas, we productify them, we sell them to different potential financiers, and if people think we're doing a good work, they will finance us. And not the other way around. We're not saying give us money and we'll do what you want.
Okay, we have Samuli, Katrina and Jan, so when you speak, think of the other two.
Yeah, so my question is that, so what you said about ad hominem argument. So say that now you have the new research coming up on the timelines. How do you see the dynamic between like the two of you? Why should Christina, what should she respond? Can she just say, according to what you said before, just, you know, that's something coming from the left, and just, you know, disagree the content of your research? If it's okay, if it's always about values in a way and perspective. So how do you see the dynamic of argument between, say, the two of you? Everything's, you know, that standpoint.
I'm not sure if I understand.
So this was a question there. So
Okay,
if
sorry.
everything, like
You involved me,
you
so
said,
I'm
yes,
confused
you said
again.
that,
Sorry.
you know, ad hominem arguments are not always that bad. Because it
Dynamic of
depends on who's
arguments
saying
between-
it. So I'm just, if that's your view of argumentation, how do you see your own results as being important? How, because I can see that then, if it's so that everything that we sort of, you can always raise an ad hominem argument, why couldn't Christina just say that, you know, that's an opinion coming from a leftist think tank, I'm going to ignore it. I don't share the worldview, so, and values, I don't care. How would you respond?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay.
So we'll pass it. Sorry, someone. Katrina.
I can hand over my question. So I now need to, I can skip.
Okay, Janne.
Brief question. I'd like to hear both of your comments on, you have very different backgrounds to your think tanks. And one of you said that we haven't had many think tanks in Finland, but it's a short history. But I think Sitra is one of the oldest Finnish think tanks, and it has a curious funding structure. It gets public funding, but then it, my understanding, plays on the private market much of that money. What do you think of Sitra as a think tank?
Well, to be honest, I haven't thought of Sitra as a think tank really. It's such a large institution, and I think they do some good research there. And I can say I feel very passionately towards how they use or do not use their money. I'm not qualified to say, but I can say that I can say that my first sort of association would be of them as a think tank. If that was something more intelligent.
I don't really know secret organizations as well. Sometimes, of course, they have huge funding. They sometimes produce quite interesting publications. Sometimes they appear as not being at all involved with politics. Sometimes they, quite in contrary, do very political campaigning, and it's very hard to sort of even understand how are priorities and functions within that organization decided on. I don't really know.
I think this again raises the question of openness. I mean, you should always tell people what you're about, and I can say I don't know what the agenda of Sitra is really. I want to ask, I never thought about it, but I don't.
Okay, I think what we have learned today is that think tanks are very important, interesting, exciting, but very hard to access and understand, partly due to their heterogeneity regarding their ways of functioning, the underlying principles, and all that. We have two nice examples here. But probably something important and interesting enough for also science students and philosophers of science to address in the future. So this was part of the reason for inviting me here. An early observation I made when friend of freedom was very keen to observe the regulations regarding time, while the friend of regulation acted somewhat differently.
That's just my
But-
independent personality.
Okay. So thank you very much.